Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week's topic comes from Soulvaluntaria, and we are talking about not sharing things. The topic as it was written will be in the description below as usual, but I'm also going to read it to you right now to start this off. So, Taria wrote, I've noticed an idea floating around, specifically in magic record-keeping books like grimoires, where it is implied or outright said that things shouldn't be shared. The implication being that sharing something from your specific practice could take away from it. Would love to hear differing thoughts on this. End quote. So this is something that a few different discussions that I've been part of online has touched on lately. The idea of keeping silent, the idea of some things being kept secret or not being able to be revealed until a certain time. I am not someone who reads a lot of grimoires as such. I didn't ask Taria for specific titles or, specific context of what is being said in these specific books. So I can't directly speak to that. I don't know exactly what books we're talking about, but the general topic of the idea that some things shouldn't be shared because sharing something could take away from it, that is something that we talk about every now and again, within the community, and something that, as I said, has come up recently in some different discussions. So I can speak to that, and that's what I'm going to focus on, which I know that is the topic, but I just mean I can't really speak to it in terms of what it might specifically mean in a grimoire when a book in specific is telling you not to share things, because it might be something very specific to that practice. It might be something very specific to that tradition, if it is a specific tradition, things like that. So I can't speak to what it might mean very specifically for whatever sources are saying it. But in general, and in relation to my type of practice, that's how I can speak to it. So yeah, the idea of keeping something secret or not sharing something because it could take away from it, to me, that comes into play only a couple of times in my personal practice, as far as there are some things that I have kept for myself, and it's not really necessarily I don't want other people to know it because it would be horrible if they knew it, but there are just some things that I create for my own practice that I keep for myself, and that just adds a little layer of feeling special to the thing, and there are other things that I share with others that I have created. But the things that I decide to keep to myself, it's not like it's anything particularly really secret or anything like that. It's just sometimes I like to keep things private, and that to me just adds a little layer of, like I said, feeling special to it, that it's a special private thing that I know I'm the only one using it. And so when I use those things, when I do that practice, when I use that item, when I say that chant that I created or whatever, it's like an extra layer in my mind of meaning behind it, So it's not really necessarily for me because I think if anyone found out this thing that I created, it would therefore not have any meaning at all. It would still have meaning to me. It's just a personal preference with certain things that I've created, and I'm not in any specific tradition that practices anything oath-bound or anything really secret like that. So I can't speak to the role that it plays in that type of situation. But I don't really have an issue with anything like that either. If there are things that are specific to a tradition and that tradition only reveals those things to members, and that's just, it's an extra thing that it's exclusive stuff that you get when you decide to join, right? So if I really, really, really was concerned about knowing that stuff, then I would go through the effort to join that group. And I don't know. But at the same time, I do prefer being part of things that it's kind of it's not made a big deal, the fact that anything is kept from you or is secret or whatever, you know, like, I don't know, that just personally doesn't specifically appeal to me, but it would depend on the situation. And I'm not trying to really make a commentary about like things that are oath bound versus not, because I think there are reasons for those things that make sense. I certainly would feel upset if there was like something that I came up with a group of people and one of them told a bunch of other people, and then all of a sudden I start seeing it all over the internet, and maybe people are taking it out of context, maybe people are using that thing when they're not the ones who created it and they don't know how it was created. Noticing as I'm saying this that there are some pretty strong parallels to like cultural appropriation in what I'm saying right now, so which is something that I'm very cognizant of, and I don't mind personally when there are things that I am told like, hey, this was created by a specific group, this is sacred to a specific group, and we ask that you not use it. I'm kind of cool with that, you know, that's just where I am with that type of thing. So similarly, yeah, I mean, if I were in any kind of group that created something for ourselves and we decided to keep it amongst ourselves, then yeah, I would be a little upset if someone went against the wishes of everyone else and told it to other people, especially if it then started being used in a way that was not in line with how we intended it, you know? So I understand that kind of thing. But I don't know personally if that's what it's about when it's being talked about in these grimoires and things like that. If it's that kind of thing where like this is a specific tradition, these are things that we do, and you have to be part of the tradition in order to utilize these things. But if so, that's a mentality that like I understand where it's coming from, and I've always kind of been of the point of view that if that's not the kind of thing I want to be a part of, I don't have to join those types of groups, you know? And if it is something that you want to be a part of, then you go through the effort to try to be in those types of groups. I don't know. That's just me personally at this time in my life. If I were to hear maybe more specific examples of a specific situation, then I would be able to give my opinion on specifics. But since we are here speaking without really any context, speaking very generally, that's my general feeling, and as always with me, it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. But like in some of the discussions that we've been having recently in other places online, without revealing anything that anyone else has said because I don't have their permission to do so necessarily, some of the things that have come up and the thoughts that I personally have shared myself, which I can of course share with you if I choose, are things like talking about, you know, maybe we've heard these ideas that we need to keep silent about things because if other people know what we're up to, they can take that knowledge of what we're doing or what we're trying to accomplish and use that against us. That is something that I definitely heard in the early stages of my practice, and where I am now is I'm kind of like, I don't know how many people are actually out there doing that, like finding out what other people are doing and purposely working against them or anything. But I have had people, like the few times that I have shared things that I'm up to online, you know, magically, things that I'm up to magically online, I have sometimes had people share with me some rather judgy, negative opinions of like their view on what I'm doing. And it can be detrimental, not only in that, you know, maybe someone hearing something like that makes you start to doubt your own magic, and that affects the energy that you're putting into the magic that you're doing, but also just in terms of like not having asked for that type of input, you know, like if you're just trying to share something for educational purposes or whatever, and then someone comes to you like, you shouldn't be doing that. It, to me, it's just really also presumptuous, because those people who have said things to me like that in the past, they're not necessarily following the same path that I am. Well, they're obviously not following the same path that I am, because they're not following my path. Like every individual is different. But they're not necessarily coming from the same tradition. Not that I operate within a very specific tradition, but you know what I mean. They're not necessarily coming from the same area of practice whatsoever. So it's kind of just one of those things where I'm like, all right, well, that might be true for you and what you believe and what you're doing. However, this is true for what I believe and what I'm doing. And so I just feel like sometimes talking about things can invite certain people on the internet to feel like they're entitled to tell you their opinion on what you're doing. And like, I don't need anyone else's opinion on what I'm doing, so I don't share what I'm doing. So there have been times, and I shared this in recent discussions too, that I will share some personal information, experiences of things that I've done, magic that I have worked in the past, only after that magic is done, after it's run its course. I do not share anything about ongoing magic. That is a habit that I got into because I had heard in the early stages of my practice that you shouldn't be going around telling people what you're doing because you never know if other people are going to try to work against you. And like I said, I don't know how many people are out there doing that, but I have had people give unsolicited opinions and advice about what they believe I should be doing with my magic, and I'm just not here for that. That's not what I'm here for. If I'm working with you in circle, then I want to know your opinion about what we're doing because we're co-creating that magic. We're doing it together and we need to be on the same page. And so I want to know if someone in that type of situation has a problem with part of the intention that we have created or part of the practice that we're doing, and we need to talk about that and work it out so that everyone is doing something that we are all comfortable with because we're all putting energy toward that goal. So that's another thing I mentioned in recent discussions is I enjoy taking part in collective magic where we are specifically sharing what we're doing with other people so that they can join in. So if you follow me elsewhere on social media, you probably have noticed that I sometimes share when there is a collective ritual or a collective spell going on that I am participating in. I will also share it with other people. And I do that because it's collective, because someone else has started it and asked for other people to contribute to it. So I share the fact that I am contributing, and that is also an invitation for other people to add to that magic as well. Now, of course, as we do that, it's also still inviting the possibility that people who disagree with what's going on can also put in their little comments on the internet about what they think we're doing wrong and whatever. And that has, in fact, happened to me as well when I've shared stuff like that. So yeah, that's just something that I keep in mind about any time that we're sharing things on the internet, but that's how I approach it personally. I have no problem sharing collective magic, specifically because it is collective, and especially when someone else is the one who has created it and is asking for other people to participate. If I've created a piece of collective magic, I may choose to share it with everyone, or I may choose to only put it out there to specific audiences of mine first, who I know will be receptive and who, if they disagree with it, will simply not participate in it, but they won't actively work against it, or they won't send me hate mail about it or anything like that, So again, case by case basis, it would depend on what I'm doing. But that's kind of been my personal experiences with decisions about sharing things versus keeping things secret or private. And it's mainly to do with not wanting to invite other people to feel like they are entitled to comment either positively or negatively on what I'm doing because it's not really their business. So that's why I don't tend to do videos or post many pictures even of magic that I'm doing or even my altars, anything like that. I like to keep things semi-private. I share things with very specific people who I am comfortable sharing that information with, but it's not something that I feel like is for everybody, and I think that's okay. So a certain amount of people not wanting to share stuff, I respect that because I presume there are reasons behind it. But then as far as with this question, the implication being that sharing something from your specific practice could take away from it, yeah, I think that would depend on the situation because I think there are plenty of things that sharing does not take away from because it just enables more people to participate. It enables us to share knowledge, learn and grow from it together. But then there are also cases where I do think that certain information getting out there, maybe especially if it isn't directly shared, but people just kind of find out about it through the grapevine, maybe out of context. There are situations where people can take things out of context without knowing the original source, without knowing, the entire situation surrounding it and how it came about and what its full purpose is. The list goes on. And as a result, perhaps there is something being lost in translation, if you will, as, like a game of telephone. The further it gets away from the source, the more difficult it is to understand what it was originally about. So I do think that there's a difference between like learning something directly from the person who created it and just kind of finding out about things along the way. And I understand that as someone who is on the internet. I think we've all seen that kind of game of telephone thing happening where like someone creates a meme and then someone else sees it and decides to remake it with a different font or a different picture, and then they put their name on it as though they're the one who created it, and then someone sees that one and makes their own version of that, and then down the line you're seeing these things with people's names on them and you think it's the original creator, but then you find out there's like 10 other versions of it, and then you start wondering, where did this actually come from and what was the original intent? The internet, right? And so even if we're not on the internet, that just happens with people too. That's just a thing that we have to be aware of with human beings. So yeah, I don't know the individual context here as far as like the grimoires that Taria has been reading, but as far as my personal practice goes, there are things that I share and there are things that I don't share. And there are things that I really appreciate that other people share about their practices, and where there are things that they don't want to share, I tend to respect that because, again, there's usually a pretty good reason. As always, though, it will depend on the circumstance. But I tend to just take those kind of things in stride. And then especially because, like, I know there are things that I like to keep private too. If someone else just wants to keep something private, I don't really mind that. But yeah, I don't go around telling other people what they should and should not share because that's up to them and their practice. Again, I'm not part of a specific tradition, so I don't have tradition-wide kind of practices or etiquette to be keeping in mind with that type of thing. I am just concerned with kind of my thing and maybe my somewhat wider community. And that's where, again, if I were working with a specific group of people or a specific community, I would want us to co-create those agreements about what are we comfortable sharing, what are we not comfortable sharing, who do we share things with, who do we not share things with, how does someone become someone that we will share things with if they want to, things like that. So then it becomes a cooperative decision, ideally, in the type of communities that I am a part of. Otherwise, it's just up to me. So this has been a rambly video. I'm not sure if I actually answered the question, Taria, but I hope that it was useful in some way regardless. So thanks so much for asking another great question. Happy March, by the way, if I didn't already say so. I probably said so last week, but spring is around the corner in the Northern Hemisphere, and I am enjoying the slowly returning amount of light. So yeah, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for watching and or listening to this video, and I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.